All right, I'm back with the Conspiracy Boys for another podcast. How you doing, guys?
Awesome.
Look, we're just going to be labeled the conspiracy guys. That's
You're my top conspiracy guys.
I was labeled that a long time ago.
All right.
We did a
Just 'cause-
podcast, who knows how long ago, I think our top favorite conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
But there was one that we couldn't really touch. It's probably like all of our real conspiracy theory, and that's the JFK assassination. We felt like we had to dedicate a whole podcast towards that, and that's what we're doing today. It is the 61st anniversary, 3 days ago, on November 22nd, so it seemed like a good time to do it. So are you guys ready to dig in?
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, just because we're two guys that don't believe in Occam's razor, like the simplest explanation is the right one or the easiest one. There's a lot going on out there.
This one's fishy. There's a lot of moving parts that are very strange, so Occam's razor is a good principle, but this is one of those possible exceptions.
Oh, I think there's way more exceptions. I think the human species as a whole, it's easier to have, it's easier to judge than it is to critically think.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easier to just come to a conclusion before having to put brain power to it. So I think people like to be fed narratives so that they can go about their lives and sleep easy at night. So that's just, we're getting a human psychology at a different pod.
We're going to feed them some narratives tonight, Vire.
I love it.
So,
lead the way, man.
Joe, thoughts on the assassination? What is this like the best conspiracy theory? The best thing, fishy story, has some weird aspects to it?
I would say so. I mean, there's been hundreds of books written on it. I think even immediately after the assassination, 65 to 68% of the U.S. population thought it was a conspiracy, that it wasn't just a lone gunman. And this is right after, like days, weeks after. So it's a lot. There's a lot of literature on it. I've done a lot of research myself over the years. I just find it fascinating, all the moving parts and different people involved. It's pretty wild.
So then let's talk about the story as it's presented now by the official reports. It is
so
that
you're going to go by the Warren Commission, right? You're going to go by their official findings.
I don't have it memorized, but I mean the findings were
the official story from the Warren Commission as published.
The official story is that there was a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald. He shot JFK in the moving car from what floor was it? In the
fifth floor of the public library. Is that what it was, Joe?
Yeah.
Fifth floor? Fifth or sixth?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Got a couple shots off and freaking connected, man. Like, that's the story, But from there, it's some strange occurrences. So how about Lee Harvey Oswald to begin with, right? There's some concerns about him as the assassin. What's the history on Lee Harvey Oswald?
So I think myself, and I know Joe has his own research, I think Lee Harvey Oswald was definitely involved, right?
Yep.
I think, so a few things on that, and Joe might be able to corroborate this. The CIA at the time of being investigated after in the Warren Commission said they did not know anything about Lee Harvey Oswald, didn't have any files on him, which turned out to be untrue, as unredacted and redacted documents were later released, I think 15 years ago, 10 years ago, as part of that congressional law that released, JFK files after the fact. They found out that they did, in fact, have files on Lee Harvey Oswald. I think they had like 40-something files, up to 180 documents on him.
All right, if you've been enjoying the podcast, I wanted to let you know that I am a residential loan officer with CMG Home Loans. If you or anyone you know is looking to buy a home or refinance, please let me know and I'd be happy to help. My contact information is in the description below. Back to the podcast.
They had 5 different operations following him when he was in Cuba, when he was in Russia, back to Texas. They definitely had files on him, and they definitely knew that there was something going on with him. Now, did they use that to their advantage in the cover-up story? I think absolutely, right? So I think it was an easy way, and I think this all circles around back to U.S. population was easier to manipulate back then, I believe. There's less sources to get your information. There's less information, period. And there's less accountability on, like everywhere you go, there's an iPhone camera now, right? That wasn't the case back then, which makes
it's not like 10,000 people's iPhone footage from the parade and the security cam footage from the traffic lights and, the ring doorbells from wherever, it's a lot different.
Who the hell would want to be a criminal today? I mean, you're never going to get away with it, right? But which makes the Sabruta film, and I know we're going to get into that, makes it all more fascinating because they never expected for this to be caught on film, right? So that's what makes it, that brings the accountability back into, okay, we can't buy this narrative that you're sending us with the Warren Commission because visual facts don't support it, right? So, and that's just, I think Lee Harvey Oswald was involved. I don't think he played the part that they set him up for. I do think he was a patsy. I do think he was the poster child for what happened, but his involvement cannot just be swept away. I mean, was he a gunman? I don't even know if he was a gunman. I don't even know if he was a gunman.
He had
at
a
this
gun,
point.
right? He had a gun up there in the window.
But was it him? That's
Yeah.
the thing. He's already, so I mean, if you want to go off the movie JFK, which I think took liberties with what happened, but like the police had his name, like what, a half hour after it was fired or an hour after it was fired, they're already looking for him. How could you know? How could you know unless that was put out there? And
Yeah.
I don't know what, did they do GSR tests back then? Was there gunshot residue found on his fingers? Like, I think there's some people that think he never even fired the weapon, that
Yeah.
they had their CIA target marksman up there that fired the weapon, and he was just in the building because he was the patsy. He was told to be here at a certain time. He had no idea what was going down, But so that's just kind of what I've read and what I kind of think on it. So,
Joe, any thoughts on Lee Harvey Oswald?
I think he was one of the gunmen. I don't think he knew of the others, but I do think that he was one of them. I know that he was groomed by a man named George de Morgenschalt, I believe his last name was. He was kind of a Russian aristocrat that had eventually moved to the United States and was friends with George H.W. Bush. And, a lot of people think that Bush's first and only tenure in the CIA was in 1974 when he was named the head. But there's other documents and other, even eyewitnesses that you will put him in Dallas even on that day. There's a letter from J. Edgar Hoover mentioning George Bush in it in regards to the assassination. When asked about it, H.W. Bush said, it must have been another George Bush, when there's no. And
his son was his son.
yeah, and here's the funny thing. When you ask anybody from that time period, where were you on the day that JFK was killed? Everybody knows, right? Everyone will tell you, I was in second grade, we were watching it, I was there. He says he can't remember, or he did say he didn't remember.
That's fishy. And that honestly might be why there's been some hesitation to release the files. And maybe at some point we'll get that. I mean, I know there's talk about releasing all that stuff pretty soon, but it would be a pretty big story if who eventually became a president was involved in the assassination of another president.
I 100% believe that's why they haven't released it.
What could be in those files that could possibly shake the foundation of America's core belief system is that if a future president was seen as part of an attempt, or not an attempt, an actual coup d'etat, which was, you kill a president to install someone else in there, it's a coup, however method you do it, it's a coup. And you have him coming up in the file and rank of people that are active participants in killing a president. And then he becomes a president afterwards.
Yeah.
That is something that I think could fundamentally shake the bedrock. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's in those files.
Yeah.
Absolutely. His son ends up becoming a president. He's still alive. His grandkids are still alive. Like, it would be, it could really,
Is this going live, Ren? I see thumbs up keep coming up on the screen.
I actually have no idea what that's all about, but if someone is somehow watching this live, that would be pretty awesome. So
that would be cool.
Hit a thumbs up if you're watching it live.
So about the shot that maybe Lee Harvey Oswald made or didn't, that's a legit shot from where he shot that, or is that a pretty standard shot that anyone that has any rifle skills can make?
It's not that bad. It's a really small street, and if you were to see it in person, you'd be like, oh wow, okay. It's not that bad.
So it's not that crazy to think that. I did see some things about trajectory of bullets, and that is a lot of the information that supports a second gunman, correct? Right, like
Yeah.
some coming from the back of the head, but also some from the front.
I think so far as I think there was there's a lot of reports. I think there was a triangulation of shots. There was the public library, there was attacks or some kind of government building, and then there was the grassy knoll, which there's a triangulation. And if you are an operative, and like I'm just going to go out there and say this right now. I think the CIA obviously had involvement, if not orchestrated the assassination of Kennedy. And we can get into those reasons later or whatnot. And maybe that's fueled by the industrial military complex, which Eisenhower warned us about in the 50s. But they were definitely mad at Kennedy for not invading Cuba. And I think if you have people in positions of power being told they can't do something, that doesn't usually resonate well with alpha males, you know? So it's like, who is this guy telling us we can't do this? We got to remove him, you know? So I think obviously the CIA and other interested parties orchestrated this. And it's like, if you're the CIA, you have unlimited resources at your disposal, you know, which I think, again, could fundamentally shake the bedrock of this country, because the CIA is not supposed to operate any kind of missions on U.S. soil. It's specifically for foreign entities. And Joe knows the history of the CIA. It was created as a result, a necessity of World War I or World War II. It was at World War II the CIA was created.
It's the predecessor was the OSS.
OSS, yeah. Operation of Special Services.
Strategic Services.
Strategic Services, yeah.
Interestingly enough, those initial officers in the OSS were spies for industrialists who had companies in Central America and all around the world, because, you know, back in those days, if you wanted your business to be run properly in a foreign country, you had to have spies so that they could see what was going on a day-to-day basis and relay it back to, you know, the owners and the investors in the United States. So yeah, it's funny. The CIA was basically born out of spying on people's own businesses.
So big business and CIA have been hand in hand since the beginning. Does it make any sense that the special interests that are part of the, you know, industrial military complex wouldn't have a hand in what was going on in the 60s at the very least?
Right. Yeah.
So I want to separate the idea of this being a CIA operation or an operation by people that have relationships with the CIA, because one of the people that comes to mind is Allen Dulles. And background on Allen Dulles, he was the director of the CIA from 1953 to 1961 under Eisenhower and Kennedy, played a significant role in coups in Iran and Guatemala, deeply involved in Cold War. JFK fired him after the Bay of Pigs in 1961.
That's right.
Some people say like that was the thing that motivated him to be involved in his assassination. But at that point, he wouldn't be part of the CIA, correct? Or maybe.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though. Those guys are thick as thieves. They all have secrets on each other. To be fired from the CIA does not remove you from the CIA, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Because if you're fired from the CIA, first off, there's no such thing as getting fired from the CIA. You're eliminated, right? You know too much. You're gone, you know, burned or whatever it is. So I think the firing gave Kennedy the illusion that Dulles was not in the picture any longer, but he was probably orchestrating some kind of strings in the background, in my opinion, you know. So
that coup in 1954 in Guatemala, General Arbenz was democratically elected, okay? And when he took power, he started to distribute lands that was owned by the United Fruit Company back to the people, okay? Guess who had stock holdings in United Fruit Company? Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles. So those guys get pissed that their land's being confiscated by the government, so they use the CIA to go in there and eliminate Arbenz. Democratically elected, too.
That's messed up.
It just goes to show you that, and then, you know, like Matt was saying, the stretch, the fingers that these guys have, the power that they have. They can use the United States government to overthrow regimes that they don't like because of their own capitalistic endeavors. I mean, just look at Dick Cheney in Iraq.
Totally. And and now the guy has an airport named after him. And it's like
He's some kind of hero, right? I don't know how they sleep at night sometimes.
But that seems like the most likely scenario to me. When you think of all, and I like to go through some of the things, but if I think a likelihood of what actually happened, like the CIA scenario and what we're talking about or have been talking about, it's probably the most likely thing, right?
Yeah, and it's because of the Bay of Pigs invasion. The history of that invasion, of why it happened, is because you have to understand that Cuba, Havana at the time, was like the place to be, for celebrities. The mob owned all the casinos down there. Batista, who was the president of Cuba, was basically a pimp for the mob. They kept making him money while they were making money, and he protected them with his military because they were keeping him ultra rich. Okay? When Castro took over, and by the way, up until the invasion on New Year's Eve 59, we were funding both sides. We were funding Castro and we were funding Batista because we didn't really know exactly how it was going to turn out. Here's the thing. Castro takes over. He confiscates 50 million acres of land that was owned by oil companies in the United States, Coca-Cola that was getting cheap sugar for their soft drinks. They were getting it like from peasant pay. Castro was going to make them pay the going rate, and he only left them 20,000 acres out of 50 million. So they were going to pump that place for oil. They were using it for sugar cane. Like it was going to make them huge, mass billionaires. Those guys.
So then that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it doesn't happen now.
Yeah.
And it's all Texas oil men who are also in the military-industrial complex.
Who else was a Texas oil man?
Bush.
It was the other George Bush.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Prescott.
Well, no,
it was HW.
No, I'm
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah,
He said
yeah.
it was another George Bush.
It goes way back to George's parents too, right? I mean, in Texas, right?
Well,
Wasn't there? Yeah, she
his
was a
father
Walker,
and
right?
his father-in-law.
Yeah, like yeah. What was Barbara Bush's maiden name? Is it Walker? Is Walker, right? And
Yeah.
they were oil, weren't they?
They were financial.
They had money though. I know they had
They
money.
had money. It was from being in with Brown Brothers and Harriman.
Okay. All right. We're getting a little off topic here. I know, but
it goes deep.
So interesting thing too, I should mention about Alan Dulles to close the loop on him. He was actually on the Warren Commission as well, so he was able to influence some of the findings of that investigation.
He was the head of it. It just makes zero sense to have that guy the head of the commission.
Yeah. So a little bit fishy. What is Castro's potential role in this? Is there, if we go kind of a different direction from the CIA to
I don't think he had he didn't have. Actually, he went on record of finding out when he found out that Kennedy was killed. He was somber because he said anybody else you put in there you can't talk to. Kennedy was someone you could talk to. Kennedy was someone you could negotiate with. He would listen rather than go by force, which was obviously demonstrated with the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? That happened just a few years earlier. I mean, Kennedy was not controllable by the owners of the country at the time.
He didn't need the money. He couldn't be bought.
No.
His dad had billions and billions in himself. He couldn't be bought.
Okay, so it seems like that's not likely. Some would say that, and again, it seems like long shot. I think we're kind of moving on from it quickly, but that Fidel Castro orchestrated the assassination because of attempts to remove him from power in Cuba. But that would maybe be the only reason. But he's like a far down the list interested party. How about?
I think Castro was smart enough to know that a lot of the things that our government does is not directed from the president.
Yeah.
Like I think he was smart enough even at that time to understand that.
I guess that would be a little bit grasping at straws though, but that I guess is
of course it is. Well,
how about the mob or mafia and the idea that they would have orchestrated it?
They're definitely in cahoots with the CIA. They've been in cahoots since World War II.
Yeah.
And especially even when the FBI, I know it's not the CIA, but when the FBI approached Lucky Luciano about the docks in New York City and keeping an eye on, German U-boats that were out there because they knew that the mob ran the unions and they ran the docks. It's how Luciano got out of prison. He had to leave the country, but he made that deal. Like, they've been making deals with the mob since World War II.
Yeah. Well, I'm reading in some of the research I did. It says that the mob might have even had a role in manipulating JFK's election with some of the union stuff they did in like states like Illinois, is what some of the stuff that I said, and that JFK's crackdown on organized crime was kind of a slap in the face to some of that, and maybe it was one of the potential reasons for their involvement. I thought
that was his dad, Joseph Kennedy, that approached Sam Giancana about getting the union vote in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked. I just don't understand why Joe never sat him, John and Bobby down and said, you can't do what you're doing. Like, you can't go after the mob like you are. Maybe he just didn't think they were as strong as they were. I don't know. Joe was a pretty, arrogant guy as well. So,
well, I mean, Jack Ruby, who killed Oswald, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's kill the guy before he can say anything.
I think that's like a fascinating, like, freaking.
He didn't do that.
Oswald kills the president, and then 2 days later, he's freaking killed as he's being transferred.
Yeah, under transfer of prisoner transfer, gets killed by Jack Ruby, who didn't do it out of the kindness of his own heart. He did that as a higher up kind of like, and he was pretty high in organized crime too as well. Jack Ruby had ties to mob bosses, right?
He had ties, but he wasn't really high up. He was
a nightclub owner, right? Nightclub owner, call it a nightclub. Gentleman's club.
Strip club,
gentleman's club, right?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both.
But I think he had, he had that relations, but he was a street guy, or, he definitely had some connections. And there was probably like, he had a debt. He's like, you do this and we won't kill you, something like that,
Well, was he? He was dying of cancer anyway.
So did he know he was dying of cancer at the time?
I think so.
Yeah, because he did die a couple years later.
In prison, right?
1967, I believe. Ruby claimed he killed Oswald to spare Jacqueline Kennedy's trauma of the trial. He said in quotes, "I want to save her from having to relive the ordeal." I don't know, dude. That seems like a...
I don't think he gave a shit about Jacqueline Kennedy.
Not unless she was dancing at his nightclub.
Yeah.
So he's repaying a debt to who, though? Is it...
It's hard to tell. You're talking about being on the fly on a wall of so many rooms, Randy. Yeah. I mean, if we have to look at this thing from the 50,000 foot level to break it all down, we don't have enough time. You know what I mean? And Jack Ruby is 5,258, 10 million, right? And like, it's just crazy.
It's just such a convenient part, because there's information to get from Lee Harvey Oswald, and it's just like, close the door on that.
So, yeah.
But maybe he was someone that could fly under the radar and be in that crowd, other than someone else that had maybe mob connections, a known criminal guy that would have been like filtered out. Maybe he was someone that the mob could pull strings with, but nobody knew his face. And that was like a convenience thing. Like, hey, send him in there. He'll do it. He owes us. So, again, grasping at straws, right? We'll never know.
Yeah. Yeah. What about I think the furthest long shot theory is the idea that LBJ had anything to do with that. Have you ever heard anything that had any traction to it? Or,
well, talk about Texas oil, man.
Mm-hmm.
He knew that he was going to be he's the guy in line if Kennedy goes out. He didn't like Jackie because they were super smart, Ivy League educated. LBJ was not. LBJ was a great politician. It doesn't mean he was a great guy, but he was a great politician. But he had like an inferiority kind of complex with the Kennedys. He didn't like them. And
he didn't agree with a lot of JFK's positions. And
right.
He didn't
Have you seen that photo of him smiling on the plane?
Before, well, this is before he's getting sworn in, right? Or after he's getting sworn in.
He's being sworn in on the plane, and Jackie's there in the pink dress with the blood on it, and he's looking over his shoulder, smiling at this guy. I can't think of the guy's name, but the other guy's smiling back. Who does that? Like at that moment, I don't know.
I think you look at a guy that had a lot to gain by the removal of John F. Kennedy. I don't want to, and there's no implications that LBJ is part of it, but I think the Warren Commission was a ruse because I think that was fully orchestrated to give the public an answer.
Oh
And
yeah.
the public wanted the easiest answer,
Well,
right?
yeah.
So, and I think obviously, I think he commissioned that, like the following week or something like that,
Yeah, and it was
yeah,
super quick. It was,
yeah,
it, it was a farce.
yeah, of course it was. Yeah.
So those are all the ways that this could have potentially went down. Is there anything that I'm missing in terms of like off the wall theories or aliens
few things,
or something like that? Is there something I'm missing?
a few questions I wanted to ask both of you is two questions. Is there anybody alive right now that knows exactly what happened? Right? And what's still being hidden from the populace of the U.S. with regards to what the real story? Because so here's the thing. And I'm going to use an analogy here. Let's say we're gonna execute a prisoner, right? And we're gonna have 10 guys with guns, and we're gonna give 4 people live rounds, and we're gonna give the other 6 people blanks, so they really don't know who killed the prisoner, right? I think that there might have been 1 or 2 people that actually knew what happened there, and I think there's probably a dozen to 2 dozen people that have pockets of information, for plausible deniability, to minimize the exposure of the real story getting out. So I don't know that there's anybody still alive that actually knows what happened.
I don't think
What are your thoughts?
I don't think there is either.
I mean,
As far as age, if you do the math,
we're 3 days away from the 61st anniversary, right? November 22nd, 1963. So the anniversary was 3 days ago, 61 years, right? 3
So-
days is 61 years. So
all the kids that were alive in like grade school, they're all in their 70s now.
Yeah.
They can't be anyone of adult status back then still
There
alive.
can't be anyone that was playing an integral role in the planning or the cover up.
Right.
But I will say last year, I mean, the 60th anniversary was a big deal. There was
Yep.
a ton of podcasts, docs, books coming out. And one of the things that I watched, I found the most interesting was it was a documentary on all the doctors that did the autopsy and handled his body after. Like those people were actually still alive. And there was some really interesting things. Again, not involved in the planning, but like just talking about, the way people were when they brought his body in. His brain disappeared. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. Like just some weird things that happened with the autopsy itself. It was like generally botched. Like those people are alive to speak to it, but at that point, it's just more kind of circumstantial on the bigger picture.
So I read some things that there was some cadaver manipulation to the fact that to show that there was no exit wound on the back of his head, so that he wasn't hit from behind or something like that. And that's kind of crazy for a unilateral story of a single shooter, because Oswald would have only had the opportunity to hit him from the back, right? It turned, he was driving away from him, so the exit wound would have been in the front if Oswald would have completed his shot, right?
Yep.
And I think the Zapruder film shows us that the first shot missed, right? Like everybody looks around, it's like, what happened to this first shot?
Yeah.
Then the second one gets him in the neck, right? And then Connolly turns in the limo. He does not acting like a person that got shot yet. So he's turning in the limo, what's going on? And then like Kennedy gets hit in the head, half his skull's off the backside of the motorcade, and then Connolly now finally like, I'm hit, And then you look at all the accounts of First Eye reporting, Secret Servicemen, there was one Secret Serviceman in the car. He said all of a sudden there was a flurry of shells coming into the limousine. Does that sound like 3 shots? Because the Warren Commission said Oswald fired 3 shots. And if you look at the cadence on the Zapruder film, it would have been impossible for that bolt-action rifle to make those 3 shots. I think you had some of the fastest marksmen in the world trying to disprove that. And I think some of them can, but Oswald was by no means that good of a shot, right? So, and again, the exit wounds and where Connolly was hit, like, really? That's coming from a different direction. So it doesn't add up with the single gunman theory. I think we can all agree. And then there was a 1979 congressional committee that was formed to answer some questions from the general public, because I think, like you alluded to, Joe, there was something like 60-something% or high 50-something% that didn't believe the Warren Commission. So the congressional committee was put out in 1979, and they're the ones that started it, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, they're the ones that started it that JFK was likely killed under a conspiracy. Right in the congressional committee in 79. came out and said that.
They
So,
think it might be up to 8 marksmen, including one. The one that took the fatal shot from the front was actually in the sewer. Like, you know how on the side of the sidewalk they've got those
oh
Like
yeah,
rectangular water drains?
yeah.
They
like
think
the
that
clown.
that's where that shot comes from.
Pennywise killed JFK.
Yeah, right. No kidding.
Wow. I never heard that one before. That's interesting.
Well, look at it. Look at it from an operational standpoint. If you wanted to make sure you got your target,
You got to
you're
go
not
on one
you're
guy.
you're not relying on one guy to make a shot.
Sorry.
Not in a heavily populated area where you can get away with staging other people in different areas without having anybody notice. I mean, this isn't a sniper in the fields waiting 3 days to hit his target. This is a motorcade that's rolling through, and you're only going to have one shot at this for an opportune area, like the kill zone, right, in Dealey Plaza,
Yeah.
the kill zone that was right there. You're not going to take any chances. You're going to have multiple angles and
It
coming
makes
in.
sense.
And
I mean, I don't want to get into the whole Trump assassination attempt, but you have one
oh my
guy
God.
who had a very makeable shot and missed. You know, there's probably a lot of nerves and, you know, moving vehicle. Like, dude, hitting, even though it's not the hardest shot in the world to make to kill JFK, it's like, yeah, I mean, one person could easily miss that shot. So it makes sense to cover your bases.
And it was missed. The first shot was missed,
Yeah.
right? You know, because there was the fire, and JFK reacts to the fire. Like, I mean, the shot, like you pow, and you hear something. It's like, what the hell was that? So you see everybody reacting to the shot. Then the next one hits him in the neck, right? I think it was in the neck, right?
Yeah, it was right in the back.
Yeah, he grabs his neck, comes out here, and it's like that. And then Connolly reacts as if he's not a man shot. So it's like, I mean, I don't know. So to me, if something so blatant is overlooked and lied about, you have to discredit the whole Warren Commission. Nothing in there is believable. Everything in there is a farce. Everything in there is a narrative, you know, shoved down the American people's throat just to say, this is what happened. Sleep well at night. We're moving on, right? You know.
Well, you said what, 60-something% of people believed it was a conspiracy or didn't believe the official story? Dude, what is it now? You know, like
like 100.
Yeah, 99.9%. No one believes.
No one believes it was just Oswald at this
So
point.
you said something very interesting on the last pod that we did, and it's like I think the government came out and I think they fed the media so that everybody that's a conspiracy theorist is a crackpot, right? It's like, what are you one of these conspiracy theorists? It's like, just because I don't believe the narrative you're putting out there, right? I mean, yeah, conspiracies are two people talking in secret to a desired outcome.
They've been going on forever.
That's all conspiracy is. Two people talking together for a desired outcome. And whenever that outcome happens, if I lead you to believe something else happened to create that outcome, but we colluded to make the outcome happen a different way, that's it. That's all it is.
It doesn't the word conspiracy theory, the term conspiracy theory, it doesn't mean falsehood.
No.
Like they've got that narrative out there now that like you can just label it conspiracy theory and you're
crazy. You're a kook. Yeah. Now, are there
something wild? You remember the police officer that was shot by Oswald on after or before he's going to the movie theater?
It's at the movie theater, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that police officer's nickname amongst the other officers was Kennedy because he looked like him.
Oh, really?
So the wild theory is that they have that guy killed. They used his body as a double. I mean, it's crazy.
Wow.
I know.
What a off the wall. I like that kind of stuff. That'd be wild, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. Who knows, you know?
So let's get the brass tacks. Who did it and why?
I think personally it's that first scenario we discussed.
Yeah,
you know, CIA involvement, Alan Dulles involvement, the secret that would shatter the discourse in the country would be if George H.W. Bush was involved, and all that stuff seems to be the most likely scenario, in my opinion.
Look what happened right after Kennedy died. Where did we go? Vietnam. We went right into Vietnam. Kennedy's body wasn't even cold, and we were in Vietnam right after. You know, and Kennedy was 1,000% opposed to putting troops in Vietnam. 1,000% opposed because he saw what happened in Korea, and he's he got it, It's like we can avoid conflict here. It's not our war, it's not our conflict. And the military industrial complex saw an opportunity to go into Vietnam, which, so here's another thing too, Joe, is if you ever wanted prosperity in the country, you just go to war, right? Because the military industrial complex created jobs, created flourishing. And then, when you come back, but that's not the case now, Like we've had ongoing skirmishes and wars for the last almost 40 years in this country.
Because it's money. It's good money.
Well, what's also too is if we don't have a conflict going on, by legality in our constitutions, we can't have a standing army.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing, right? Yeah.
Anyway.
Where do all those contracts go if there's no skirmishes and wars? Where do all those, Raytheon and Northrop Drummond and where does all that? You know what I'm saying? They lose.
Can you guys still hear me? Because I had to take out.
What's that?
Can you still hear me? Because I had to take out my beats. My beats died.
I can still. Yeah. And honestly, we got to wrap it up soon because Joe's going to go anyways. Is there anything else you guys want to add before we wrap it up?
No, I think it basically it's the CIA in cahoots with the mob and the military industrial complex and your Texas oil men who are also part of the military industrial complex. It's a little bit of, but it was essentially Cuba that set that whole thing in motion. Them losing all, 50 million acres in Cuba. That was billions and billions and billions of dollars lost.
I think it was, and you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it was orchestrated by the CIA because they had unlimited resources to tap into the local players in certain areas and different cities, multiple cities that they needed to get where they needed to get. Keep in mind, Oswald jumped around from Russia to Cuba to Texas, New Orleans. I mean, you got everything where Oswald was. I don't know that we'll ever know the answer. I hope, because there's something like, I think another 3,400 records that need to be unredacted or need to be released for these Kennedy files to be released. And I really hope that the declassification of these is written into law soon, because I do think at this point now, the American people deserve to know what happened. Because I cringe to think, what could our country look like had Kennedy stayed the course? Where would we be if Kennedy fulfills his term, gets elected again because he was a popular president? Where are we with the country at that point? Totally different course, I think. So.
I hope that stuff gets released. I really do. Yeah. All right, boys. I think that's a good time to wrap it up. Joe's walking around the house looking for his shoes, looking for his booter.
Joe doesn't.
All right, boys. Thanks for doing it. We'll have to find another conspiracy to talk about in a few months. But for now, have a happy Thanksgiving.
Come on, Randy. I thought we were supposed to reignite your passion for baseball. Why can't we do a pod on that?
Dude,
I love that.
Let's do it, dude. I've been trying to line up your schedules. You guys are busy guys. So.
All right, buddy.
Good. All right, boy. Take care.